was a landmark victory. The People's Democratic Party, or HDP, swept into parliament in 2015 on a wave of optimism and defiance, issuing a challenge to Turkey's ruling Justice and Development Party from the very beginning.
There is no room now for you to look down on us from the balcony and shake fingers at us in this country. Now you will be speaking to us on the same level. Get used to it. Those days are over.
Kurdish political parties had for decades been shut down or brought before the Constitutional Court of Turkey to be banned. All had links with the PKK, a separatist group designated as a terror organization by Turkey, the US, and the EU. But after the height of that conflict in the 1990s, Turkey's political environment opened up during Recep Tayyip Erdogan's 11-year tenure as prime minister. Election materials, for instance, were allowed to be delivered in languages other than Turkish. Such reforms set the stage for the rise of the HDP. It became the first predominantly pro-Kurdish movement to enter parliament as a political party, rather than through independent candidates, a method used to get over Turkey's 10% electoral threshold. But ultimately, the HDP's ascent was short-lived. Within weeks of its entrance to parliament, the PKK broke the 2.5-year-long ceasefire and violence escalated. What would follow would be a confluence of events that would radically alter Turkey's political environment. HDP politicians have publicly acknowledged their links to militant organizations in the region.
Biz sırtımızı YPG'ye, YPJ'ye ve PYD'ye yaslıyoruz. Bunu söylemekte, bunu savunmakta.
And they have also alluded to the pressure of operating politically in parts of the country where the PKK exerts considerable power.
PKK'nın öyle bir gücü var ki, PKK sizi tükürüğüyle boğar, tükürüğüyle.
After the failed coup attempt last July, HDP members were arrested and accused of having ties to the PKK. They included the co-chairs Selahattin Demirtas and Figen Yüksekta. Yüksekta has since been stripped of her title. Some Kurds say the HDP is being unfairly targeted, and if it were the political wing of the PKK, it would never have been elected, because the PKK is deeply unpopular with most Kurds.
It's a political decision. It can't be more than that. If the leader of the party has 6 million votes, and if 13 MPs of this party are in parliament, it's nothing but a political arrest. The HDP is not working for the PKK. I don't believe that. The HDP is against violent acts, both by the PKK and Turks.
But Mehmet Amin Akinci, who runs a small restaurant in the same Kurdish neighborhood of Istanbul, says that the HDP was more interested in serving the PKK than the people who elected it to power.
It's already obvious where they're taking orders. It doesn't represent me. I, as a Kurd and Arab, opened a restaurant in the oldest and most historical location in Turkey. The government doesn't impose any restrictions on me. So, I don't accept that the HDP represents me.
There's a divide in Turkey's Kurdish community over the HDP, whether it's ultimately responsible for its own demise, and conversely, whether the government has deliberately sought to dismantle a party that still remains third largest in parliament, and one which stands in opposition to a constitutional reform proposal set to be put to a referendum next month. What is clear is that the HDP has lost support among Kurds as the PKK has stepped up its attacks. Now, the HDP's survival may depend on peace talks and the PKK laying down arms once and for all. And while this sensitive topic is discussed in hushed tones among Kurds, many wonder if this is the end of the HDP. Will they again have a party of their own? Randolph Nogel, The Newsmakers in Istanbul.
I'm joined now here in the studio by Ceren Kenar. She is a journalist specializing in the Middle East, and Galip Dalay, the research director of Ashaq Forum. Thanks so much, both of you, for joining us. Galip, a couple years ago, June 2015, first round of the elections, there was a sense of hope in the Turkish democratic process, given the example of the HDP, the third biggest party. They got 13% of the vote. You even wrote positively about it, the fact that these new kids on the block are a sign that things are healthy and moving forward. A couple years later, or a year and a half later, everything seems to be falling apart for the HDP. What went wrong?
Well, what went wrong, the primary reason was what went wrong with the Kurdish peace process, and what went wrong with the Kurdish peace process was very much also dependent on the political calculation of the PKK, mainly driven by its consideration vis-a-vis the Syria. And when the PKK decided to go back to the fighting, the HDP faced a dilemma, whether to remain within the political spheres, meaning that like putting some distance between itself and the PKK, or to be regarded as more or less reduce itself to the political wing of the PKK. Unfortunately, one of the decisions that the HDP made was more or less reduce it to be perceived as the political wing of the PKK, because the HDP had an opportunity this time. Traditionally, the pro-Kurdish party received around 6.57% of the vote. And back then, the argument that our social base and the PKK social base, more or less, are the same was valid. But HDP received around 13% of the votes. That means 50% of the increase. And vast majority of these new voters were not socialized into politics by the PKK. So HDP should have tapped into this new opportunity. But unfortunately, the HDP was unable. You can cite many factors. Some of them, like, some of them was natural because HDP could not face the PKK when the PKK and Turkey enmeshed in such a fierce fighting. But nevertheless, the HDP could have made itself much more and different voice than the PKK. This is like, where unfortunately it failed. And this is where unfortunately its fate very much was related to that of the PKK.
So, Ceren, I mean, there was a point in time when during the peace process, there were arguments that, hey, their links to the PKK might be useful because they can be mediators or interlocutors. Was that only useful for as long as there was dialogue? Once it became conflict again, they needed to make a choice?
Yeah, I think this is a very fair question, but in order to become a mediator, you actually have to be an agent, be an actor. I think this process actually demonstrated us that HDP was not an actor that many hoped it become one. So it was not, as Galip, said, it actually couldn't distance itself from PKK, and it's quite barbaric events during the last couple of years in Turkey, and even Kurds in Turkey who vote for HDP. Opinion polls show that these people also hold PKK culpable and responsible of the end of the peace process. So it actually shows that the decline of the votes of HDP actually shows that many Kurds and as well as the Turks who voted the party for the hopes that this party can be a new left-wing liberal voice in Turkish political spectrum, they actually also think HDP is very much linked to PKK, and therefore hold HDP as well as PKK responsible for the increasing violence in Turkey.
So they got 13% of the vote in the June election, and then later on in the year, in November, they got just over 10, and they lost 1 million votes. And as has been established, not only did they tap into a Kurdish base, but there were many leftists, many secularists who, I guess maybe the nationalism of the MHP or the Kemalism of the CHP and so on didn't appeal to them, so they thought, okay, this is for us. Those people, if there was an election today, who would they vote for?
Well, I think, those people, who would they elect? It's very hard to answer it because those people is probably very much disillusioned. And one of the reasons that they went to the HDP was because of their disillusionment with previous parties. But some of these votes already went to, we know where it went. It went to the AK Party, because the argument that the new voters mostly came from the liberal or the left-wing or non-Kurds are not correct, because actually the increase of the HDP mostly came from the conservative Kurds, not from the liberal or the left-leaning so-called, let's say, like Turks. So therefore, the main reason for these conservative Kurds turning away from the AK Party to the HDP was very much related with the assumption that if the HDP is politically strengthened, it will become a much more strong agency in the Kurdish peace process, and that means the Kurdish peace process will transition from being a military conflict to a political process. So that was the main reasoning of most of the conservative Kurds. But when HDP reduced itself more or less to an ideological challenge to the AK Party, and basically creating more and more, it's being based on creating AK Party as its constitutive author and also not making a distinction between where it stands and where PKK stands.
Yeah, and they didn't make that. Yeah, they didn't make that distinction.
But that doesn't mean that they have to completely cut ties with the PKK.
Right.
It means that putting a different argument, a different narrative than this of the PKK.
That's interesting. That's interesting. And so, okay, there has been ample evidence of collusion sometimes, of connections at other times, and so on. I mean, these are not just like wiretaps or whatever. You know, they're people found with weapons or leaders at rallies carrying the coffins of suicide bombers and so on. Now, in response to that, and in response to other things, there have been crackdowns. The leadership's in jail. Parliamentarians have been, kicked out of parliament. Has the crackdown on the HDP been fair, Ceren?
I think it's not helpful to solve the Kurdish issue in Turkey, this kind of a crackdown. Whether it's fair or not, whether it's legal or not, that's a different question. These are either, moral or legal questions. But as an observer...
Has the crackdown matched what they've done wrong?
The thing is, I don't think that the Kurdish issue in Turkey can only solve through military terms, because this is a political problem. It has cultural roots. So in order to address the demands of the Kurds in Turkey, the government could have adopted a different strategy, which is to fight against PKK, which is a just war, which is a legitimate war, because the government tried to settle a peace process with PKK, and despite that effort, PKK violated the ceasefire. And it started attacks in Turkish major cities, not only against Turkish military targets, but also civilians.
Yes.
So the war against PKK is quite fair in that sense. However, if the government had differentiated between the military and political aspects of that issue, I think it would have garnered more support among the Kurdish population in Turkey. When you ask whether those votes that some Kurds stopped voting for HDP, some of those votes turned back to AKP, that's true. But I think there are still a proportion of delusioned Kurdish voters in Turkey who are both alienated from PKK, but also alienated from the government.
So you're saying that both the HDP and the government need to make that bigger distinction between fighting and politics and who you talk to, right?
Exactly.
And in the middle of a conflict, it's very difficult to do that, right? Galip, there is a vote coming up, and we're all trying to speculate how people will vote. It's a very simple yes or no in April. How will that constitutional referendum affect the HDP, whether it goes yes or no?
Well, for the time being, HDP stands with the no, and HDP is very much powerful when it comes to controlling its social base. So HDP is one of the party, unlike the MHP. If the HDP leadership goes for the no, that means vast majority of the HDP social constituency goes for the no. But I want to add another dimension. One of the trouble in the current strategy, this issue, you cannot just reduce the political issue to a legal one. So right now, just going after the HDP lawmakers or the mayors through the legal arguments or the legal processes will not be helpful, because in the end, the legal process, the state of Turkey's legal system is not known for the most liberal flavor. So that will actually complicate the question rather than solve it, because still we have the core of this constitution remains from the 1980s coup constitution, and that's why every single political party in Turkey is unhappy with this constitution. So if you go after a political question with a constitution and legal system that is the reminiscent of 1980s coup, it's not very helpful. You will only aggravate the political process. So while to some extent the legal process was fair and justified, because once you are asked to go to appear in the court, you should abide by this. So this is like, fair and fair. But reducing the whole matter to that of a legal one, I'm not sure to what extent it's going to be very helpful in dealing with this issue.
Final question for you, Ceren. Can they come back to the sort of legitimacy they had in June 2015, or will that only ever happen a long time after there's another ceasefire?
I think the damage is done. So HDP lost a lot of credibility, not only in the eyes of the Turkish public opinion, but also among Kurdish voters. And so did PKK. People's lives were ruined, destroyed. I've been to the southeast in Turkey while the clashes was going on. The picture is gloomy. So these people these Kurds hold PKK responsible of the end of the ceasefire, which they benefited a lot in terms of security, economic reasons. The tourism was flourishing in that era, in that region where there are clashes going on right now. So the thing is, I think it will take a long time and a need for a total renovation of HDP to gain that kind of a support among Kurds and Turks again. And HDP, there are leading HDP politicians right now who are giving interviews, quite self-reflexive interviews, I must say. They are critical about PKK, they're being critical about their own party, they're admitting the mistake. I think these are important steps, but it's too little and too late.
Okay, Ceren and Galip, I wish we had more time. This is a fascinating topic. Thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Thanks.